Hello and welcome to WION live broadcast from London. I'm Oliver Regan and these are the headlines. Official data says the British economy fell into recession during the last 3 months of 2023. Office for National Statistics reports UK's GDP fell by 0.3% in the last quarter. French Defence Minister says Paris will meet the NATO defence spending target in 2024. Member countries are expected to spend 2% of their GDP on defence budgets, a target only 18 countries are meeting as of now. Day 3 of the farmer protest in India. Farmers are blocking railway tracks in key Punjab districts. Protest leaders to hold talks with the government later today. Months ahead of India's upcoming general election, Supreme Court strikes down electoral bond scheme allowing anonymous donations to political parties as unconstitutional. Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan warns neighbour Azerbaijan is planning a full-scale war against the country. Remarks after recent border skirmishes left 4 Armenian troops dead. The UK economy officially entered a technical recession, marking the first time since 2012. This comes after 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth, with the final quarter of 2023 seeing a decline of 0.3%. While technically a recession, the overall contraction is relatively mild compared to historical trends. While the overall recession is mild, the specific impacts on different sectors vary. Services, the largest contributor to GDP, saw a 0.2% decline. Production, particularly manufacturing, experienced a steeper 1% contraction. Construction took the biggest hit, shrinking by 1.3%. Inflation remains a concern though, down from its peak. The Consumer Price Index currently stands at 4%, squeezing household finances and potentially hindering economic recovery. The Bank of England faces a difficult balancing act. On one hand, they need to address inflation to prevent a further strain on households and businesses. But on the other hand, raising interest rates could further dampen economic activity. Experts remain cautious about the future, with some predicting a prolonged period of low growth. The coming months will be crucial in determining the severity and duration of the recession and the effectiveness of policy responses. Well, for more on this, we're now joined by our correspondent Stuart Smith from London. Stuart, Rishi Sunak promised to grow the economy, but now we have confirmation that the UK is officially in, albeit a mild recession. Give us your assessment and also the political ramifications for this news.
Yeah, so it's problematic for Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, because by the Conservative Party's own metrics, one of the 5 targets was to grow the economy. And although it's mild, some in fact even calling it stagflation or stagnation, it does fit the definition of a technical recession, with the previous quarter down 0.3% and this one, with the previous one down 0.3% and the one before that down 0.1%. The Labour Party has reacted to that by saying that the promise to grow the economy from Rishi Sunak is in tatters, though the Conservatives can, to an extent, be pleased that it wasn't as bad as the Bank of England originally did forecast. Though going against that sense, especially when it comes to political ramifications, is that not only is this 0.1% GDP fall from quarter to quarter. Compared to last year, per person, the country is now 0.7% worse off, with a large amount of immigration, meaning that more people, the economy not doing so well, and GDP per person looking even poorer than this headline statistic may even indicate, feeding into concerns which are very prominent in a lot of election coverage about migration. Now, Rishi Sunak and the finance minister here in the UK say that this is a sign, because it's not as bad as it was once predicted, that their plan is to a degree working. They're not going to make radical changes, the finance minister suggests. Jeremy Hunt saying earlier that what this means is that they should continue to cut taxes on work and business to build a stronger economy, sticking to the plan, the finance minister says. And there was some good news on Wednesday for the Conservative Party with the fact that inflation didn't rise significantly. The Bank of England said it pretty much leaves the UK where it was, but it's still higher than desired at 4%, and shows that there's still room for progress in the UK economy. The OECD, a body which looks at the economic statistics of countries around the world, predicts that the UK economy is likely to grow more than France and Germany by 2025, but less than similar countries like Spain, Canada and Australia.
And of course, the Bank of England play a key part in all of this, holding interest rates currently at a 20-year high. What's your assessment on the Bank of England's next move? Are we set to see them starting to ease back, or is it too early to say?
Yeah, the Bank of England for now is not saying, as it usually doesn't. It likes to keep its cards close to its chest. But there are economists and people that work in the industry that are thinking there may start to be a fall in interest rates by June. So a few months yet with this economic data showing that really there isn't much change, but the potential for a lowering of interest rates. Remember, the target is 2% for the UK economy, so 4% is well above what the Bank of England would like, though it's come down from a peak of 11%, so in that regard it is better than it was. And politicians like to claim credit when it comes to interest rate falls, but a lot of the time it's a reflection of the broader global economy, or the economy in Europe, as well as domestic policies. So to an extent, this is partly out of the control of Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister.
Yes, it's a tough balancing act. Stuart Smith from London, many thanks for your insight. Benjamin Netanyahu has vowed to press on with a powerful operation in Gaza's Rafah, even as calls mounted for him to hold off sending troops into the territory's overcrowded city. Netanyahu has insisted Hamas battalions must be eliminated in the city. This, as Egyptian and Qatari mediators in Cairo are hoping to secure a ceasefire that would see more of the roughly 130 hostages still in Gaza released in another swap. A Hamas source told news agency AFP a team was headed to Cairo to meet Egyptian and Qatari mediators a day after Israeli negotiators held talks with the mediators. CIA Director William Burns had joined Tuesday's talks with David Barnea, head of Israel's Mossad intelligence service, which Egyptian media said had been mostly positive. US National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby called the negotiations constructive and moving in the right direction. Netanyahu said Israel would push for the release of hostages through strong military pressure and very firm negotiations. He said, and I quote, "I insist that Hamas drop their delusional demands, and when they drop these demands, we can move forward." The United States rebuked Israel for demolishing the home of a Palestinian activist in East Jerusalem, saying its ally was damaging its own standing. In Washington, State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller said the United States condemned the demolition and would encourage Israel not to target other homes.
We condemn the demolition of Fakhri Abu Diab's home. He is a community leader in East Jerusalem. We believe that demolition not only obviously damages his home and his family and the lives that they have built there, but the entire community who live in fear that their homes may be next. This has been their family home for generations. Part of the structure dates back to before 1967. He has been an outspoken community leader, including against demolitions, and now his family has been displaced.
Joe Biden has shielded Palestinians in the United States from deportation for 18 months. The US president faces growing anger over his support for Israel's Gaza offensive in an election year. Biden signed an order saying the Palestinians should not be deported in light of the ongoing conflict and humanitarian needs on the ground in the Gaza Strip. Well, for more on this, we were earlier joined by our correspondent Jodie Cohen. Jodie, what can you tell us about the latest on the hostage release talks that are continuing today?
So on Thursday, Hamas is attending the Cairo talks for a hostage release deal and pause in the fighting. Israel sent a delegation on Tuesday to listen, and that was after Hamas set out their demands, including calling for the release of hundreds of Palestinian security prisoners serving time for murder. Now, the United States has said that a number of Hamas demands are obvious non-starters. Prime Minister Netanyahu has called them delusional and said that strong military pressure and negotiations will be key to freeing the 134 remaining hostages, many of whom are said to be being held in Rafah. And he said that the operation in Rafah would take place once Gazan civilians have been evacuated from there. Meanwhile, 100 representatives of the hostage families filed a war crimes case against Hamas at the International Criminal Court, calling for the arrest of Hamas leaders on charges of kidnapping, sexual violence and torture.
And what can you tell us about what's being said in response to the reported investigation by the US into Israeli actions?
So the US is reportedly investigating Israeli actions in Gaza and the alleged use of white phosphorus in Lebanon. Now, Israel says it abides by international law, that there was a ceasefire on the 6th of October, and that was broken by Hamas's massacre on the 7th and by subsequent daily rockets fired by Hezbollah in Lebanon from the 8th of October. The IDF says it targets terrorist targets, gives warnings to civilians before any counter-offensive. And at the same time as the US is reportedly investigating Israeli actions, White House spokesperson John Kirby has said that he's praised IDF efforts to protect civilians, saying that Israel sometimes takes actions that he's not sure even the US military would take in terms of informing civilians ahead of operations where to go and where not to go. Now, in terms of white phosphorus, international law allows for white phosphorus in some circumstances, and in previous comments the IDF have made, they've said they only use legal weaponry, that the use of white phosphorus is influenced by the operation and availability of alternatives, and they use it only for smoke screens, not to attack.
The Russian president has described US counterpart Joe Biden on Wednesday as more predictable than Donald Trump. However, Vladimir Putin said the Kremlin was prepared to work with whoever wins November's election. Asked by a journalist who Russia would like to see win in the likely contest between the Democratic incumbent and the Republican frontrunner Trump, here's what Putin said.
Biden. He is more experienced, he is predictable, he is a politician of an older upbringing. But we will work with any US leader to whom the American people will show trust.
Putin batted away questions about Biden's age and health, with the president set to turn 82 just weeks after the election. US polls show voters have strong concerns about Biden's age. The age issue has been compounded by two recent episodes in which Biden confused European leaders with dead predecessors.
When I met Mr. Biden in Switzerland 3 years ago, people were already talking about his inabilities. But I saw nothing of the sort. Yes, he would look into his paper sheet every now and then. I would look into mine, to be honest. Him hitting his head as he was getting out of a helicopter somewhere? Who in Russia hasn't hit their head while stepping out of somewhere?
The White House was forced to vehemently defend Joe Biden's competence last week after a special counsel report described him as an elderly man with a poor memory. Biden himself responded angrily to the accusation, but then compounded the problem by mixing up the presidents of Egypt and Mexico. Trump has also mixed up people's names recently, confusing his last rival for the Republican presidential nomination, Nikki Haley, with former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. Putin, nonetheless, expressed strong opposition to Washington's foreign policy under Biden.
We should look at the political position. I believe that today's position of the US administration is harmful and wrongful in the highest way possible. I said this to President Biden back then.
Я считаю, что позиция сегодняшней администрации в высшей степени.
The Biden administration has led a Western response to come to Ukraine's aid in the two-year conflict with Russia. The stated preference for Biden comes despite his harsh criticisms of Putin and after Trump on numerous occasions expressed admiration for the Kremlin leader. The Republican presidential contender also ran into fierce criticism after recently Trump suggested he would encourage Russia to attack any NATO country he thought had not paid enough money to support the alliance. The former president reacted to Putin's comments at a rally in South Carolina on Wednesday evening, praising them as a great compliment. Trump said, and I quote, "I got along good with him, but he doesn't want to have me. He wants Biden. Biden is going to give him Ukraine." On Wednesday, top officials warned the United States is facing a new and serious national security threat. Reports suggest it involves a Russian attempt to build a space-based nuclear capability. The Republican head of the House Intelligence Committee urged the Biden administration to declassify information about what he called a serious national security threat. Mike Turner gave no details about the nature of the threat, and the Biden administration also declined to address it. However, several leading lawmakers, including House Speaker Mike Johnson, cautioned against being overly alarmed. A senior congressional aide, speaking to the Associated Press news agency, pointed to concerns about Russian anti-satellite weapons. The congressional aide said he understood that the threat relates to a space-deployed Russian anti-satellite weapon. Such a weapon could pose a major danger to US satellites that transmit billions of bytes of data each hour. The congressional aide stated it was not yet clear if the Russian weapon had nuclear capability, but said that is the fear. The rapidly evolving threat in space was one of the primary reasons that the US Space Force was established in 2019. A lot of that threat has to do with new capabilities that China and Russia have already developed. They can interfere with critical satellite-based US communications, such as GPS, and the ability to quickly detect missile launches. In recent years, the US has seen both China and Russia pursue new ways to jam satellites, intercept their feeds, blind them, shoot them down, and even potentially grab them with a robotic arm to pull them out of their programmed orbits. One of the key missions of the Space Force is to train troops skilled in detecting and defending against those threats. In its 2020 Defence Space Strategy, the Pentagon said China and Russia presented the great strategic threat in space. The Pentagon flagged their aggressive development of counter-space abilities and their military doctrine, calling for extended conflict to space. The former president of France, Nicolas Sarkozy, is found guilty of illegally funding his 2012 re-election bid. Sarkozy was accused of overspending during his campaign. It was a verdict handed down by a Paris Court of Appeal. Sarkozy received a one-year sentence, of which 6 months were suspended. This means the suspended period could potentially be served using an electronic tag instead of imprisonment. The case is also known as the Gamalion affair. Sarkozy allegedly overspent on his campaign and hired a PR firm, Gamalion, to cover it up. Wednesday, the previously guilty verdict from a lower court. While the prosecutors couldn't prove Sarkozy's direct involvement, they argued he must have been aware of the scheme.
What I keep from this is that the Court of Appeals confirms that it's about fraudulent organizations and overspending of campaign funds. What was said in the past was that it was not about Bagmalion, but about that so-called campaign funds of the candidate Nicolas Sarkozy. This was confirmed by the Paris Court and today again confirmed by the Court of Appeals.
However, Sarkozy's lawyers said they will appeal the new sentence at France's highest court, putting any immediate prison term on hold. And this isn't the first legal challenge for the former president. In 2023, he received a suspended sentence for attempting to bribe a judge in 2014. Known for tough anti-immigration policies during his presidency, Sarkozy is the first former French president to face a custodial sentence. The legal saga continues for the 68-year-old politician. He will be tried next year for allegations of taking illegal funds from the late Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi. That was during his 2007 presidential campaign. 15 times